I love the sound of church bells. I don't know if you do or not. I know we're not having a memorial this morning. Did you know that in a monastery, the bells ring 9 times a day? The bells call the monks and the nuns to prayer, and then to early morning prayer, and then to breakfast, and then to Mass, and then to lunch, and then to prayer again, and so on until everybody goes to sleep at night. And when you're a guest at a monastery, as I was this summer, you really learn to tune into the bells that call you to the meals. Of course, everyone is invited to join in the prayers too, but often visitors come simply for the quiet, the peaceful setting, and the sense of being on retreat. I know many of you go away during the summer, take your own kinds of retreats, because I see pictures of you on Facebook in mountain cabins and in beach cottages, fishing on rivers, or taking long road trips, even just across Oklahoma, finding a place to retreat somewhere, somehow, because we all need to pull away from the demands and pressures of our work and our daily lives, of our paid work or our volunteer work, or even our volunteer work at church, God forbid, or of our family lives. So my retreat this summer was at a Benedictine monastery in community with a group of people who have become very important to me, a group of people who are exploring a new monastic way. People call it today a monastery without walls, I'll call it. And it's important for you to know that monasticism matters to me because for many, many years, I never would have walked into a church. I actually would say I couldn't have walked into a church. I couldn't even say the word church. And I wouldn't have considered coming even to this church for worship services on a Sunday morning. Something strange and very uncomfortable happened inside of me when people said the word church or God. I got very uncomfortable, and I would try to redirect the conversation to almost anything else. I know some of you, many of you, have similar stories to mine, different stories about how creeds and therefore churches stopped making sense at a certain point in your life, so you started avoiding them. About how the hypocrisies between what was preached and what was done started to become overwhelmingly glaring, and so you dropped away. How the fear of judgment and eternal damnation really started to feel too debilitating and even harmful to your hearts. Or perhaps how no religious leaders were articulating what you felt was real and good and true about the world. And so you started seeking peace in the natural world around you, rather than coming to church. It took me years, many years, to understand how much it hurt my heart to have people, even my own family members, accept or reject me, decide to include or exclude me based on what they thought I did or didn't believe. And so I decided not to talk about belief at all for many, many, many years. It turns out monasticism, of all things, gave me the structure and the freedom, gave me the diversity and the unity, gave me the openness to and the distance from the world that I needed to begin to dare to be openly spiritual in my own life, and to eventually come to commit to a denomination, our denomination, and to a religious community like this one. Looking back now, I think that was because it is really scary to say, I want to know God. I want to know the truth. I want to know what ultimate reality is, and I will follow that truth wherever it leads me. And it's even scarier to say, I want to discover it on my own. I won't accept what you, the religious and secular authorities in my life, my teachers, my parents, my ministers, are telling me that truth is. It can be terrifying, paralyzing even. And you certainly don't have to be a minister to want to know these things, to want to discover this truth, to want to come face to face to God, with God, as some of the mystics would describe it. And really, if we're honest, fewer and fewer people are turning to a minister or a monastery these days when they start asking these questions or feeling these longings. It actually seems like sometimes the opposite is more true. It's the person who tends the garden or takes care of the children who is often the one we find knowing we need someone with an open heart and gentle ways and time to listen to us. One who knows that their self is not really at the center. So in fact, a visitor or a seeker like this will likely come to one of you long before he or she comes to Marlon or me or Dave or Joseph. Are you ready? Hopefully by the end of this morning you will be. It's so simple, really, but impossibly hard to hold on to, this idea that the self is really not at the center. I was at a family wedding last weekend. That's why I wasn't with you here at church. And my cousin asked me at a wedding my cousin asked me to officiate at, which was very sweet. So it was a bit of a family reunion. And at one point, we were sitting outside at a picnic table, and my cousins were talking about how they used to smoke cigarettes. The wedding was in Portland, Oregon. They were telling stories about how they quit or struggled for years to quit. And suddenly Beth said she quit the day she knew she was pregnant. My cousin Carol jumped in and said it was the same with her. And then they both stopped talking suddenly as if they had landed on something important, which I think they had. When we're pregnant, our self is forcibly decentered. One person becomes a community of 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how many you're carrying. And all of a sudden, we have to really consider the concerns of another person as if that person were really just as important as we are. Which is what a monastic community, I've learned, is all about. Decentering the self, traditionally, in the Catholic tradition, through the practice of simplicity, silence, regular prayer, humility, and radical hospitality. And there's a very parallel tradition of monasticism in the Buddhist tradition. But monasteries were, and still are, full of very real people. I like this passage in the Cloister Walk by Kathleen Norris, who writes, one modern monk, when asked about diversity in his small community, said that there are people who can meditate all day and others who can't sit still for 5 minutes. There are monks who are scholars and those who are semi-literate. There are chatterboxes and those who emulate Calvin Coolidge with regard to speech. But, he said, our biggest problem is that each man here had a mother who fried potatoes in a different way. What monks and nuns learned long ago is wherever you go, there you are. Whether way out in the desert or behind the walls of a monastery, the self still likes to claim the center. So monasteries may be more familiar to us than you might have imagined. They're actually quite familiar. They are covenanted communities, too, centered around agreements, just the way we are, about how they will live together in community. So I'm going to give you just a very brief summary of monastic life, so you'll see how much we have in common, really. As the Catholic Church, the first church, was getting organized and accumulating power and influence, many people were drawn to take a different direction. They walked into the wilderness of the desert, literally, away from the distractions of their day, to find and face their own true natures by looking inward. Although they appear as solitary figures in our imaginations, they were really very much part of a community. They were, as we are today, communities of resistance. They insisted that divine wisdom dwelled in the human heart and could be discovered within with attention and due diligence. Fast forward to the early Middle Ages, and we find the great mystical texts written by women monastics like Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila, Hildegard von Bingen, and many others. At that time and place in history, we know this, and in many places still today, women had to stay home, normally, submit to and serve their husband and his household from a very young age until death. But women who took vows in monastic communities were free to leave their homes, free to never marry, free to study to their mind's content, and to serve others to their heart's content. The enclosed monastic cell was paradoxically not a prison at all, but a place of freedom, where a woman of that time could commune with her own God, often in female form, without interruption or external control from priests, male priests, or confessors. No man owned her body. She could even write about her experiences and get published. How countercultural is that? What I see is that a significant challenge then and today is finding the right balance of structure and freedom, of diversity and unity, of openness to and retreat from the world, which is what I'm calling the work of keeping our hearts in order this morning. How do we find that balance between structure and freedom, diversity and unity, openness to and retreat from the world? I can tell you the symptoms I notice when my heart is out of order. You could probably, Mr. Fortner could probably hang a sign on it. He probably recognizes the symptoms. I tend to find fault with everyone else except myself. There isn't time to go to the gym or do my normal spiritual practices, even though there's plenty of time for Facebook and my favorite Netflix series. I tend to feel self-righteous and superior, and am willing to wait for you, whoever else, to figure out what you did wrong. I could go on. Instead, I trust you to diagnose your own symptoms as you move through this week, and I want you to hear what St. Benedict, the founder of the Order of Benedictines, called paramount goals in community, because I still think they're relevant today. He wrote, what is wanted is not that we should find ultimate truth, nor that we should have ease, nor that we should be without hurt, but that we should live fully. Therefore, we should not fear life, nor anything in life. We should not fear death, nor anything in death. We should live our lives in love with life. It is for us to train our hearts to live in grace, to sacrifice our self-centered desires, to find the peace without want, without seeking it for ourselves. And when we fail, which I do every day, to begin again each day. If we adopt an outlook of confidence and trust and perfect our experience by care for others, if we live in the certainty that we are heirs in the providence of the outermost mystery, we will begin to change into the persons we have the potential to be. It is for us to train our hearts if we want to fulfill our full potential. Now, you may have found it curious, too, that there's no mention of Jesus Christ in there. There's no mention of sin or salvation, hell or damnation. There is, however, lots of common sense and kindness. There's some good psychology, a healthy Buddhist-like sense of non-attachment, and even a classic sort of American Unitarian striving to become better than we are now. It's very interfaith and universalist. It's also very similar to what the founders of our first churches in North America in the mid-17th century, had in mind. They started with small meetings, very much like our Sunday circles here, changing the theme of their conversation from week to week, meeting in their homes, but soon decided they needed a church, a real church. They knew that even deeply loving people like ourselves needed an institution to help them, as they called it, repair their spirits and stay on track. Just as with Benedict, in their founding documents, there's no mention of sin, salvation, or damnation. By far, the most commonly used words among them are affection, affections, affectionately, embrace, love, loving, and lovingly. Not religion, advice, advise, agree, agreement, liberty, or liberties, although those other important words like reason are also present. They seem to know, like those monks long before them, that deeds matter more than creeds, and that who and how we love will determine what and who we are. What we believe and think matters, what we do matters, our doubts matter, but what matters more is learning how to keep our hearts in order so we can give and receive love, life's greatest gift of all. in that wedding ceremony, for my cousin in Portland, both Rob and my cousin and Cody, her now husband, are electrical engineers. I told them I've come to think of their relationship as an engineering experiment in love. I told them together you are exploring and discovering the quantum mechanics of love. The pressures and processes, the particles and the particularities, the tangents and the tangles, the magnetism, the minutiae and the movements of the human heart. Because love is as invisible as subatomic particles and just as real. I think it's the same for all of us here. Our congregation is an experiment in the quantum mechanics of love. We live every day in that tension between structure and freedom, between diversity and unity, between openness to and retreat from the world. And just like monks, are you ready to be monks this year with me? Because our doors are always open, we must always be ready to welcome and accept strangers into our community. For the people who dare to walk through our doors for the first, 5th, 15th, or 50th time, you are the most tangible evidence and only proof of the love they may see or feel that day. I mean it. So I want to ask you this morning to remember how you felt before you found All Souls. For some of you, maybe how you felt before you found another Unitarian Universalist congregation in another part of the country. How did you feel? I remember the day I walked into the Midcoast Fellowship in Edgecombe, Maine, a long, long time ago. I had moved to the area recently and didn't have family nearby or friends yet. I was missing my strong circle of women friends and our deep connections. I don't remember who preached or anything that person said. All I remember is David Bailey. David Bailey is the one who came up to me and talked to me at the end of the hour. And we had a long conversation. At the end of it, I felt like I had known him forever. And I realize now that he made friends with me, which felt really good. On a Sunday not long after that, I stayed after church for a committee meeting. I was a young mother with 2 young daughters, so I stayed to learn about the Religious Education Committee's work, and I raised my hand because I had an idea and promptly was elected chair of the committee. I hope that doesn't scare you away. About 6 months later, when a very musical family moved out of town, I became the music director. I learned about leadership in my little Mid-Coast Fellowship. Notice it was a fellowship, so I could still avoid that C word. And that fellowship became the village that helped us raise our 2 children over the next 10 years. And that work is what led me here. I want people who walk through our doors to have that same experience or an even better experience. And as you can imagine, I hear a lot of stories, some good, some not so good. I'm going to share a few of the not so good ones right now. One man said he'd been coming to church on Sunday morning for 3 years, but he still hadn't connected with anyone. A woman said she couldn't believe how cliquey our community was. It wasn't until I attended Friday Night Adventures, she said, that I started making real friends and having people to hang out with on Sunday mornings. I know all our hearts are hurting a little bit hearing these. So you can take this moment to protect your heart with what I'm going to describe in just a few minutes as an inner monastery, a way I keep my heart healthy, I think, because this one hurts even more. I've also had members of color tell me they've come in and out of this building hundreds of times and had hundreds of white people walk by them without saying hello, good morning, how are you? Who you are, how you are, who you talk to, what you say to them, how we welcome each other really matters. It's an ancient and very important art. One I'm studying and want to continue learning from, one the monastics were the masters of. It's important because our churches change people's lives. They changed my life dramatically. One member, Melissa Baldwin, she's here today, dared to walk through our front door and then into a criminal justice outreach team meeting. There were a few years in between those 2 entries Within a year, though, she became a chair of the team, changed jobs in her life outside her walls, and has discovered her life's calling. So I'm asking you this morning to examine the condition of your own heart and to consider creating an imaginative inner monastery for yourself. The fact is, fewer and fewer monks or nuns live within walls today. More and more monasteries are supporting themselves by becoming retreat centers, offering the public a taste of the radical hospitality for which monasteries have always been famous. And more monastics are talking and writing about a way of living in love with life beyond the walls of the monastery, in a monastery without walls. When I want or need to recenter myself or get my heart in order so I'm less judgmental and more kind, I imagine I have this inner monastery protecting my heart. Sometimes it looks like an old-fashioned telephone booth. Seriously, do you remember those? Inside my personal monastery, that old telephone booth, I can feel how alone I am, so how responsible I am, and at the same time, I can feel how connected I am. I can feel the source of the only superpower I have, which is my heart and my capacity to love. I was thinking maybe we need capes when we greet people at the door. Dan, what do you think? Of course, it's your superpower too. And like any skill, we all have to practice loving to get good at it. And if you decide to try it on this week, to see yourself as a monastic without walls, there will be so many opportunities every day to practice. Marriage, for those of you who are married, mirrors monasticism and the taking of vows, is definitely an opportunity to decenter the self, to think in terms of we instead of in terms of I. This community is another opportunity. Being a parent, taking care of a parent, being a good friend, those are all ways to practice decentering ourselves so we can give and receive more love as we let go of our egos, let go of our positions and our postures and our claims that we're right. It's a central part of my monastic practice, and my vision for this year is that it would become a central part of our collective responsibility. So at the same time that I'm encouraging you to care for your own heart, your own solitude, to take time for yourselves, to retreat when you need to, I'm also asking you to consider signing up today to help us create this sense of radical hospitality in our community. Tiffany Cross, our new membership coordinator, has been outside for the last few years. She's outside in front of the church today. If this is the right time in your life, only if it's the right time in your life, please sign up and know that we all know that our social justice work is transformational, but we forget that our simplest acts of radical hospitality may be even more so. Because when people feel like they're fully accepted for all of who they are, they not only teach in our Sunday school, they not only serve on a pastoral care team, they not only reach out into the community or become ministers, they learn to love themselves and be better lovers of other people. So, next week, we're going to start ringing those bells every Sunday morning again. And I plan to use that sound, the sound of those bells, as a reminder to me to come home to myself, to come back to my heart, to check to see if my heart is in order, to ask, do I need to say yes more often? Or do I need to say no more often? I'm going to check to see if my rhythm is a little off and ask, do I need a conversation with someone or do I need to be quiet? Do I need to sit still or do I need to move my body? Do I need to come to church to hear the choir or sit next to a stranger who may soon be a friend? I'm going to take responsibility for the ordering of my own heart this year so I can learn to love myself, my God, and each one of you a little better. I hope I can count on you to practice being a monk without a wall, without any walls this year. May it be so.
We are your church, and we are proud to be your church, or at least a church that's having a positive impact on your life. I am personally blessed to be your minister, or at least a minister who you're allowing to speak into your life. I hope you'll support our ministry and share your love beyond belief by texting LOVEBB to 41444 or go to our website. But you can just text LOVEBB to 41444 and make your gift. It's wonderful. Thank you. Be blessed and be a blessing.